Hi, this is Kathy Whiteman. This is my third take. I hope I can do it fast. Okay, so again, this is Kathy Whiteman, and this is for my Introduction to Technology class at UVU. And my assignment today was to read a 7-page handout about the Spaceship Challenger and what went wrong, why it exploded, and to answer 3 questions. So I read my 7 pages, and I didn't think that it had enough information to really understand the situation very well. So I have read dozens of articles now. I have a pretty good idea. I may not be able to explain it very well, everything that happened, but you know, it's kind of in here. Just verbalizing is a problem. Okay, so question number 1. What could NASA have done differently? So I believe that NASA could have been more involved with the Marshall Space Flight Center and with the Morton Thiokol Company, not just with the managers, but with the engineers themselves that manufactured the solid rocket motors and the O-rings, which was the problem, right? That's why it exploded. So without going into details. So I think that if their meetings would have included those engineers, that maybe they would have had a relationship such that Bajoli and some of these other engineers would have felt comfortable talking to them and maybe getting that launch to be stopped. Okay. So I think background, right, that's what they could have done. Otherwise, obviously, they could have just not done the launch. I mean, if you really want to be that basic. Okay, but I'm in a hurry. All right, so question number 2. What could Roger Bajoli have done differently, if anything? So I really think that Roger did his very best under the circumstances. So I think what you really need to remember is what the culture was like in 1986. And I'm a bit older than my classmates. So I actually do remember 1986. I graduated from high school in 1985. I was a nanny for my sister's children in 1986. So I remember seeing Krista McCullough, the school teacher that was on board the Challenger, on Sesame Street. So she was like everywhere, right? And so the whole world was excited. Anyway, but that's besides the point. So the culture. So my dad worked for Hughes Aircraft Company in California for 30 years. He was hired right out of college. Most of my friends, the same situation. Their parents were hired right out of college, and they kept working with that same company. So employees were company men, and employers took care of their employees. It was a reciprocal relationship for the most part. And that didn't change, until, I don't know what, the last decade, where now people, they change jobs every couple of years. It's what's best for them, and companies aren't very loyal to their employees either. So, but back then, right, you were company men. You towed the line. There's a hierarchy. You followed it. Also, at the time, Americans were risk takers. Went to put a man on the moon, went to explore space and the final frontier, or any of those kinds of things, had Americans at the time not been risk takers. So much was accomplished because they were not risk averse. But things started to change. Think of the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. They have hundreds of rules, and all of it probably is a result from some tragedy of another. Whether it's death or dismemberment, or I don't know. There's lots of different kinds of tragedies. And also with Russia, because Russia was planning some space exploration that summer too. I forget exactly what. But I don't think the Berlin Wall had come down yet. Reagan was president, and he was the one who was like, Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Loved Reagan. So anyway. Right, so there's a big competition. We had to be bigger, we had to be better, we had to be everything more than Russia. Remember all the spy movies? It was, America versus Russia. Now it's like the Middle East, but back then it was all against the Russians. So there was a lot of pressure to be out there first, and NASA transferred that pressure on down. I read that in some article, and I couldn't find it today. Anyway, so you put all those circumstances together, that culture, and Roger Bajoli and the other engineers were really up against a tough wall. But they did it. They did it anyway. So for 10 years, Bajoli had been writing memos, and largely they were ignored, no matter what his language was, and some of it was pretty, very direct, right? Loss of life, great catastrophe, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was like as direct as you can get back in 1986. They finally did do the managers set up a task force, and then on the Wikipedia page for Roger Bajoli, it states, after a month, Bajoli realized that the task force had no power, no resources, and no management support. What's that, right? It's like nothing. So, anyway, that was very discouraging. There was that teleconference the night before, and again, they like, no, we can't do this. We know it's going to fail. They couldn't prove it would fail. Couldn't prove it, but they knew it would. The likelihood was just so strong. But there was all that pressure, from NASA, and anyway, they did what they did. So, and Bajoli was just severe depression. He was ostracized from the society there. It's a one-company town. People were afraid to talk to him for fear that it was risking their own careers. So it was a really, really tough situation for him. And he says in one thing, he says, I fought like hell to stop that launch. I'm so torn up, and this is 3 weeks later. I fought like hell to stop that launch. I'm so torn up inside, I can hardly talk about it even now. He did explain what happened with the O-rings during this interview. He was anonymous. And then within days of that broadcast, that's when the commission that was set up to investigate started researching the O-rings and the SRMs. So anyway, but Roger was just extremely sad. He said he's quoted in a 2016 article from NPR, I'm very angry that nobody listened, Bajoli told me. And he asked himself, he said if he could have done anything different, but then a flash of certainty returned. We were talking to the right people, he said. We were talking to the people who had the power to stop that launch. So for me to judge him, can't do it, right? To his death, he felt that he did all that he could do. That's good enough for me. Okay, I'm tired. I've read a lot of emotional stuff lately. So anyway, sorry. Number 3, what do you, the student, see as your future? Engineering, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to be an engineer, so no worries there. But I did find a way of how it can relate to the career path. I'm a communications major, and the Wikipedia page for the Rogers Commission report is so interesting. It's not very long, but it says that, so this is kind of a quote from, not kind of, it is straight from the Wikipedia page. The report also strongly criticized the decision-making process that led to the launch of Challenger, saying that it was seriously flawed. There was a meeting the night before the launch to discuss any major pressing issues that might delay the launch further. Several of the Morton vehicle engineers stated their concerns about the O-rings and urged the council to delay the launch. However, because there were no members of the Safety Council, the council decided to go ahead with the ill-fated launch. It is certain that even though high-ranking members of the council did know about the issues, there were plenty of members that could have stopped the launch but decided not to. This was done in large part because of the management structure at NASA and the lack of major checks and balances, which proved to be fatal in this scenario. The report concluded that failures in communication resulted resulted in a decision to launch based on incomplete and sometimes misleading information, a conflict between engineering data and management judgments, and a NASA management structure that permitted internal flight safety problems to bypass key shuttle managers. So as a communications manager, I found that just really interesting, and it just emphasizes to me how important it is to truly communicate. Right? Communication is not just talking and not just kind of listening as we're doing something else. It's like really trying to understand what the other person is saying. And another article I read about this other thing that blew up, I can't remember the name, but anyway, the structure there at NASA is just It's just been terrible. And so the managers didn't understand what the engineers were talking about. They just kind of ignored it. So anyway, it's so important to really listen, really try to understand, and have a dialogue, right, back and forth. You try to understand me, I try and understand you, and let's work together and make sure our needs are met. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity to research the shuttle. It was a fascinating discovery. So, and sad. It was just really, really sad. So, okay, thanks. Bye.